when there are blind people that are portrayed in movies, they really want a blind person in there. So it's an interesting. I don't. I like to see blind people get work. I like to see blind actors do what they want to do, and they've had some wonderful ones. But it's an interesting controversy as to if a sighted person is a better actor than the blind person, then maybe I would say though, but if it's just easier to not have to produce the script in Braille, then I'd have a harder time with it.
Welcome to the Eat Your Content podcast. I'm your host, Rich Herrera. Thank you for pushing play on my little podcast. I appreciate it. Just a reminder to follow me on socials at Rich Herrera and at Eat Your Content, and to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, and make sure you hit that bell icon so you know when new episodes are going to drop. In today's special episode, I have a trailblazer as a guest, a trailblazer in the culinary world. Not only was she the only blind student in her culinary school, but she went on to become a cooking instructor for the Oregon Commission for the Blind, where she taught others with vision loss how to cook safely and independently. Today, she's the founder of The Blind Kitchen, a business with a clear mission to empower people with vision loss to reclaim their kitchens with confidence, safety, and independence. She's frequently praised for her vivid and clear descriptions of adaptive culinary tools and techniques, helping others navigate the kitchen through skill, not sight. In this episode, she's going to share her inspiring journey, the tools and tips that make a difference, and the importance of accessibility in the kitchen. But we're also going to dive into a little bit of pop culture, specifically with the Disney Plus series Daredevil Born Again. There was a small little scene where Matt Murdock cooks, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and how Hollywood depicts those with blindness. Please welcome to the pod, Debra Erickson. Debra, thank you so much for being on the pod today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Did I get everything correct in the intro there?
I didn't recognize who that was. She sounds wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I know talking about comic books is not kind of in your wheelhouse. So when you saw my email, I'm sure you're kind of like, what in the world is happening here? But I'm so glad you're kind of stepping a little bit outside of your comfort zone to talk a little bit about food and pop culture, because that's what my podcast is about. And when I watched Daredevil and I saw this scene, how he was cooking blind, I said, I want to talk to somebody who's in that world and kind of see how it was depicted and see how realistic it was. And then, as if by chance, your profile hit my inbox, and I was like, I couldn't have timed that any better. So Chef Debra, thank you so much for coming on. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about you, your background, the Blind Kitchen. You have such a unique story, and I want to share it with my listeners and hopefully inspire those that have vision loss to know that they can be in the kitchen, and for those that have family members, how we can help. So I want to talk a little bit about you and what inspired you of your love of cooking. How did that passion evolve into a career path?
I did not always love cooking. I grew up one of 12 kids from Indiana, so mom did not have time with each of her 7 daughters to put them in front of a stove and help them cook. So my participation in cooking was to peel 10 pounds of potatoes, set the table, and help do the dishes. All the girls did it in groups. And so then after I left home and I cooked, I raised 2 sons, and the youngest one is 6'5", so I must have done something right, but I cooked out of boxes and cans. I could read directions. And at that time, there were no cooking shows. So you had a cookbook. That's usually, or you got the food and you read the directions. And so that was how I had cooked. There was I didn't care about cooking one way or another. It was just another job to do. But I also taught adults as part of my career, because I wasn't diagnosed till I was 28, and I lost the majority of my vision in my mid 50s. So there was a long time when I had other careers. And so I knew I wanted to teach adults, and I was at the Oregon Commission for the Blind taking my blind skills lessons, Braille, and learning to use my phone without my vision, my computer with just listening. And I was taking a meal prep class, and the light went on in my head, and it said, oh, I'd like to teach this. This is fun. I'm enjoying the camaraderie. I'm learning things. And then the light went off, and I thought, "Oh, but you don't really know how to cook. How are you going to teach other people to cook?" And so I stewed about it, and I was doing research on the internet and stuff like that. And I realized that there's so many components to cooking. I mean, from accessing and reading recipes, and we're not even talking without vision loss. It's organizing,
Right.
cleaning, all
Hmm.
that kind of stuff that I couldn't wrap my head around it, and I couldn't figure out a I love Excel spreadsheets because I can put things in little boxes, and I could not make cooking go into little organized boxes. So I someone said to me, well, why don't you go to culinary school? And I thought, huh, well, I can't see. That's one reason. But then I thought about it. And I thought, why not? Let me give it a try. Maybe I can't do it. Maybe it will be too hard. And at that point, I was watching cooking shows,
Yeah.
and culinary school was very challenging, but it was also very rewarding. The chef instructors were amazing. I had to compete at the same level as the other students. They couldn't give me any special favors or anything, but they really installed. I learned that there was history involved, and there was culture involved, and there was art, and especially science. That is the main helper for me to be a consistent good cook, was learning the science of things so that I could find out the temperature through like a talking thermometer, and I would know where I was at in the process without being able to see if the pancakes have little circles in them, holes coming up, or if the uh, cake is browning on the top. There's a lot of other ways to get that information if you know what you're looking for. That is that was the love of cooking. It's once I got into culinary school, it's like I love this. And so that's where I flew from there.
Yeah, so I want to kind of stick around with the culinary school part for just a minute because you mentioned that you went to a traditional culinary school. You didn't go to one that, offered special accommodations necessarily for those with vision loss. How did you what was that like going through that in terms of, like you were just saying, a lot of cooking, and for those of us that can see, kind of take for granted, like a lot of cooking is based on sight, like you were saying with pancakes. When the bubbles form on the top or around the edges, that's when you know to flip it. Well, if you can't see the bubbles, how are you going to know to flip it? So you're going
You're
through
in
culinary
trouble.
school with all of this. How did the instructors kind of cater their teaching and training for you? And like you said, you didn't get special treatment, but there had to have been some accommodations to get you through. What was that like for you?
So it was solving one problem after another. So like one of the problems was in a commercial kitchen, you cannot have a phone unless it's wrapped in cellophane. And mine, I use an accessibility that's called voiceover. And if I have cellophane on it or a bag, it causes the cursor to go all over the place. It doesn't, like, you can see a cursor on your screen. If I touch my screen, that cursor is just going to go all over the place. And so I
Mm.
couldn't do it with my phone. I couldn't have a laptop. I couldn't have an iPad in there for the same reason. They're gross. Your fingers are on, your ears are near them, your mouth is near them. So I used a tool that is meant for the blind that I got introduced to, and I went to McCloskey Culinary Institute in Vancouver, Washington. It's on the Clark College campus, and they gave me this thing called a Victor Reader String that's very very tactile. I could have it in a Ziploc bag, and I was able to prepare my recipes the night before. The chefs had to tell me what the recipes were going to be so I could be prepared, and then I would just press pause and play on this machine. And then I had to think it through from the beginning to end before I
Wow.
even got to school. So, and that's what cooking with vision loss is. It's a lot of problem solving before you turn on the stove. Don't even turn it on because you're just going to get stressed out. Get your problems all solved before you turn on the stove.
Wow. Wow. And then going through culinary school and graduating and moving from there, what was that feeling of accomplishment like as you were, I don't know, walking across the stage and accepting your, I don't know, diploma or your accomplishments through cooking school, and you made it through? What was that feeling like that day?
It was a real feeling of accomplishment. Some family surprised me and flew in from Indiana and California to be there. I did not know they would be there. They were all talking behind my back and friends. And it just was such a time of celebration, just because culinary school is not easy. Some people go there because they think it's going to be an easy way. This is home ec. It is not home ec. It is a ton of studying. It's a lot of heavy lifting. It's many, many hours. And so it was a real feeling of accomplishment because I had worked hard to make it happen. I had so many people cheering me on and being part of the celebration. It's one of the best days of my life.
Wow, that's amazing. And then after culinary school, you went into teaching. You became a cooking instructor, and you were teaching at the Oregon Commission for the Blind.
Mhm.
So, how, when you were teaching, were you teaching specifically those with vision loss, or were you teaching anybody how to cook?
No, I was teaching adult Oregonians with uh, who were legally blind and wanted to
Okay.
take these classes as part of their voc rehab, getting them prepared to live independently and go to work. If and it could be sudden vision loss, like a car accident or a gunshot wound or a brain tumor, or it could
Mm,
be people like me that go slowly over time, or it could be people that have been blind from birth that never have had vision. So whoever's legally blind, they are entitled to our services. And that's all I wanted to do was teach, and I loved it. But I graduated in June of 2019 and I went to work right away. And then March of 2020, COVID hit. And
mm.
so then I was paused for a year and a half because COVID was kind of a crazy time. People didn't know if we could be in same rooms together, and teaching people with vision loss how to cook remotely wasn't something I was prepared to do.
Yeah.
That's a little above my pay grade. I like being hands with them. So what I did do was started to pull together the information I had learned in culinary school. How did I handle eggs week when we had to do omelets, when we had to do over easy eggs, when we had to do sunny side up eggs, when we had to do omelets? I needed to be able to master those, and I found different tools and techniques to help me. So I just started organizing it because I didn't make all of this stuff up. I didn't invent it all. They weren't all my ideas, but there was no coordinated place on the web. I found little gems in books, in podcasts, in um, YouTube videos, in different blogs. There were a lot of little jewels. Once I kept looking for it because I needed the answer or to make it up or figure it out for myself. So the blind kitchen, I started to organize all that information because between eggs week and fish week or seafood, you don't have time to organize the eggs. You're just lucky you got through it. So let's move on to fish. And so that's how the blind kitchen came to be. I just started organizing all of that information and thought, maybe there's a way to reach people. And we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, but the videos on my website, even if you have no eyes at all, it's all audio described. And we'll talk about that with that Daredevil scene, which was quite interesting. So if you are wondering how do you make an over easy egg or a poached egg, you'll watch the video or read the detailed description, and even if you have no vision at all, everything's described: what it is, why it's blind friendly, and how to use and care for it. And if I'm not talking in those videos, we hire a professional voice to describe what I'm doing, because sometimes I've just got to concentrate and I can't be talking and describing. And so we hire a professional voice and edit him in to be able to tell people what's happening.
That's amazing. So the Blind Kitchen, if I'm understanding the timeline, was birthed out of COVID. And what's amazing about COVID and a lot of stories I hear is it forced so many people to pivot. And if,
Yeah.
for some, if COVID never happened, is it fair to say that the Blind Kitchen might not have existed?
I don't believe it would have. Who starts a business in their late 50s, first of all? And also, yeah, I love teaching. That's all I had planned to do. This was not even anywhere on the horizon for me as a concept until COVID, until I had time to say, okay, what am I going to do now? I've got a lot of time on my hands.
Yeah. So you described the Blind Kitchen as this like repository of tips, tools, tricks, gadgets for those that have visual impairment to help them in the kitchen. Are there a few favorite adaptive tools or products that you came across that you're like, whoa, where was this when I was going to culinary school?
Exactly. So I did a commercial work experience in a commercial kitchen, and I was hired as a blind person, but there were a lot of other cooks cooking there. It was a deli grocery market combination thing, and I and they required the insurance company required that all of the cooks wear something called cut gloves or cut resistant gloves. I'd never heard
Hmm.
of it, and so I had to wear one, but so did everybody else, and I was like, why don't blind people know about these? It turned out some blind people did know about it. And some agencies have been using them for years, but it never made it to the Oregon Commission for the Blind for whatever reason. And so that is one of my favorite tools because, especially, you'll get this, even if you can see, if you're grating on a box grater, I don't know of any cook that has not left their knuckle skin in the food of the
Oh
cheese
yeah.
or the carrots. It's because they're weird. They're angled. They have different numbers and types of blades on each side. So if I'm using that cut glove, whether it's for cutting up a carrot or whether it's for grating that food, if I feel contact between my finger, which is gloved, and the grater, I'm just going to stop right that second. It's going to snag. Or if I'm cutting up a carrot or something like that, and all of a sudden the blade touches my finger and I'm not expecting it to, again, I'm just going to stop. If I weren't wearing the glove, then I would already be cut before my brain got the information that there had been intended contact made. So it's a really good tool. And to be perfectly honest, they really beat the cutting skills, our knife skills, into our heads. We hours and hours of practice. So I
Oh yeah.
generally don't use it when I'm cutting, like, on a cutting board or whatever. But I always use it when I'm grading.
Yeah. Grater or a mandolin. Yeah, for sure.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, how has the response from the community of visually impaired cooks been to the Blind Kitchen? Are there any testimonials have that you came across that really meant a lot to you of some of these lives that were changed because of what you've done?
There I do get a lot of feedback that way. And I've got to say, the ones that make me the most emotional and feeling like this work does have a purpose that's affecting others' lives in a positive way. It'd be like you, Rich, if you lost your vision, you love to cook. Part of you would be gone. Part of your
Yeah.
identity, if you couldn't figure out how to get back into the kitchen and do what you love doing, and for a lot of us, it's our love language too. And so for a lot, and not to be ageist or sexist, but for a lot of older women, being the cook for their family was a big thing. They did Hanukkah, they did Christmas, they did Thanksgiving. A lot of men, again, this is my Indiana coming out, but they were the grillers for the family. They did the 4th of July and Day and Labor Day. And now, how can you get over an open flame and cook safely? And how can you find that hot dog when it's trying to roll away? There are tools and techniques to allow you to do that. So, um, the ones that make me most emotional are either from the families or the people themselves that say, I thought that part of me was gone. And so when the holiday would come, everybody'd be in the kitchen cooking. They weren't really even invited in. They don't want to be invited in because they can't be a part of it. But their families also will say, I got tired of seeing mom sitting on the couch during holidays and being so depressed. So it's that younger group that are Googling, how do blind people cook, and coming up with different uh, and coming up with across the blind kitchen if I'm lucky. The word seems to definitely be getting out. And then the other people that I serve are agencies who teach people with vision loss how to cook. We have different
Mhm.
collections, like cooking instructor collection and things like that. So we try and tailor it to what people ask for.
It's amazing. This makes it not you're like teaching individuals, but you're a resource for other people, other organizations that don't have this type of format or class that you can give them resources and say, hey, you could start this in your area and be a
Yes.
resource to those in your community that need it. That's amazing. So the reason why I brought you on is I wanted to talk about this scene in Daredevil, and I um, talked to you about it, and you're like, "Oh, I don't really watch Daredevil. That I'm not really kind of a comic booky person." But you said your son was,
Hmm.
and he, I'm sure, loved the show,
He did.
as
He
did I.
did.
And it's weird being a comic book fan and kind of this foodie person because while everybody was watching the show for like the action scenes and the fight scenes, I zeroed in on this like 3 minute, 2, 3 minute scene of
Hmm.
Matt Murdock cooking with his girlfriend, Heather Glenn, in the show. So just to kind of set it up, I don't have the video clip because I don't want to, get a copyright flag on my podcast or anything. But so it's basically Matt Murdock cooking dinner for his girlfriend, a romantic gesture, if you will. And you see a couple of techniques that he does. They're talking, and what I appreciated about the scene is his girlfriend Heather Glenn did not ask him at all, "How are you doing this without catching the place on fire?" Right? It was just an accepted norm that he can just do this. Now, Matt Murdock has superpowers, so it's a little bit unfair. He's blind, but he can quote unquote see through
And
his
smell
heightened other
cologne
senses.
through three apartment floors.
That's right. He could hear where a bullet landed, and by just it rolling on the concrete, just amazing, so
Yes.
unrealistic and that sort of thing. But he did a couple of techniques. They're talking. He pulls some glasses down, pours a drink. He puts his finger on the glass and pours the drink. He's stirring a pot. He's also has another pot on the stove. He opens it up and he puts his hand over it to check the warmth. And one thing that I caught on a rewatch is after you put the lid back on, he actually like touched the pot, and I'm like, "Whoa, that's hot, dude!" But
Maybe it wasn't.
maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Uh, but it was just, if I had not known he was blind, it looked like any other cooking scene, except for these just little minutia details of how he adapted himself to cook. So, as you were watching that scene, through the audio description and things like that allow you to watch a TV show. How did you feel about that scene in total? And then what was done right? What was could have been improved? Kind of walk me through the quote unquote realism on a scale of 1 to 10. How real was that scene?
So I think it could have been very real. I couldn't see it. You described more to me. It was ironic to me because audio description, they have it a lot on Netflix and Disney and Amazon Prime, where they are audio described, where they never talk over the characters talking, but when the characters are quiet, I pretty much know everything that's going on. In fact, more than sighted people, because the audio describers know what I need to know to understand the scene where the clue was. The key was in the book. I never saw the key in the book, my friend. It's like, well, they told me it was in the book. So it was amazing to me, and I'm grateful that they do this, that Hollywood does this now. But that scene was not described well. I had a hard time even finding it. That there was another scene that was better described was of, I can't remember, the bad guy. He was making an omelet,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
that one was way better described, but you described it to me, and it sounds like it was realistic. For example, I did a little funny when you talked about him touching the hot pan, but that's how I know if my pan is centered on a stove top is I touch the top of it, because you can touch the rim of a very hot pan for just a second, and it's going to cool immediately when you just a tap. You can't hold it there, but you can tap it, and you can't touch the food or the water because it's going to continue to burn you after you pull it away until it has time to cool. So when I'm cooking on a stove, I am pretty much constantly touching the top all around the rim of the pan, because if it's centered over the heat source and I've got the right size pan on that it's bigger than the heat source, then
Hmm.
it's going to be equally hot all the way around. But if I'm off center just a little bit, now I'm going to touch it at 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock feels really hot. What that tells me, much hotter than the other ones, that tells me that the heat source is now climbing up the side of the pan. It's not coming from underneath it. So that's why I can get
Ah.
hotter faster. So then I just have to nudge it in that direction until, once again, I'm doing my checking. So it is realistic that he could touch the top of that pan to find where to put that lid back on, or hover above the pan for the spoon. And pouring drinks, that is definitely, people can do it by listening as it fills. I'm not real good at that, but that we also have tools like, it's called a liquid alert, and it's got a 9-volt battery, and then it's got like two wires that, or three wires that hang over it. And two of them are longer, and then the other one's about a half an inch long. And when you pour the liquid and the liquid comes up in the cup, whether it's hot or cold, and it hits those two longer wires, it completes a circuit and it either beeps or vibrates, depending on which one you buy. And then if you continue to pour and it hits that third one in the middle that's shorter and only like, a quarter of an inch for the top, it goes really loud and really fast, like stop,
Oh, wow.
stop, you're going to overpour it. So there are things we can do to get audible cues. And if I was with you, I think we're buddies now, and I was pouring you a glass of wine, I would put my finger in there and know when to touch the top. You would know I wash my hands all the time.
I
They
trust
used to
you. I
make
trust
fun of
you.
me. There you go. But if I don't know you or I've got guests in my home, I'm going to use that liquid alert. They don't want my finger in their wine.
Sure.
So it's a way to do it in a more professional manner and respectful. But so there are tools out there, some of which I'm casual with and some of them which I'm going to use more depending on the impression I'm trying to give.
Yeah, so now that I'm rethinking that scene, he did take the lid off the pot and he hovered his hand over the steam, I guess to check the heat level.
Okay,
And
yeah.
and then yeah, he put both hands on either side of the pot just for a brief second after he put the lid or right before or after he put the lid back on, he touched the sides of the pot just real quick and then let go. And then the pot that he was stirring, they didn't show what he was making, so I don't know if he was making a pasta or whatever, but
Hmm.
talking about him like stirring something. Let's just say it was a roux. I don't know.
Sure.
With roux, it's flour, it's fat, and the different colors of roux is going to
Yep.
differentiate the flavor, and that is really based on sight. So when you think about somebody with visual impairment stirring something, and you stir something so it doesn't burn or that it heats evenly, how can or what techniques are there out there to for something like a roux that depends mainly on sight to see how done it is? What techniques are there that you teach people to adapt?
Well, smell can be a lot of indicator. Like brown butter smells very different than, so if you're cooking a roux longer and it gets to get that nuttier smell, you
Mm.
you you can tell. The other thing is I can get visual assistance through my phone or through, I have these are you familiar with the Meta smart glasses, the
Oh
Meta
yeah.
Ray-Bans? Oh, I
Yep.
love them. They've changed the world for the blind community
Oh
because they
wow.
use AI to help us. Or I can access a service called Be My Eyes, or IRA, they're visual interpretation services, and either a volunteer or a person paid, I have a subscription to the account, can come on and look through my phone camera or look through the camera on my Meta glasses, and they can tell me. Now that's assumed the person I call, whoever picks it up, can cook. Maybe they can. Maybe they're lying to me. But if I like in culinary school, we had to do the blonde roux, and then it went all the way to the red roux for gumbo and stuff like that. It became a matter of time and temperature. So you were talking about some of the accommodations they made for me, and there were several. Like number one, I think it was an 18 burner gas stove that they had. That you have 30 students here and there all over the kitchen, using it, or 20 students, whatever, at different times. It would be almost impossible for me to know which pan was mine. It just wouldn't have been fair to have had to compete with all those bodies for that. So they gave me an induction burner that I was able to mark with bump dots so that I know where 300 was, I knew where 350 was, I knew where 400 was. And that way I could always do that confidently, and there were like 8 induction burners, so other students were using them too, but they left the marked one for me so that I always know where it was located, and I'd be able to use it. And so it just became a matter, when my vision lessened, and when I lost it, my hearing didn't get better, my taste didn't get better, and my smelling didn't get better. If you give me a hearing
Hmm.
test, it's not that but I rely on it a lot more now. So I notice it. So most people have 70% of their brain involves interpreting visual cues. 70% of it, while the other senses fall somewhere in the 30. So my brain is freed up quite a bit because it's not counting on vision anymore. It's counting on the smelling and stuff like that. So I definitely, if you watch me cook in the blind kitchen, my face is down near the pan a lot, smelling, listening, because most people, one of the things they do is they overcook food. They cook it at too high of a heat. And for some reason, some seasons like searing a steak or searing a scallop, you want that caramelization and you want it to be fast because you don't want to kill the inside of the meat. But for most foods, they don't benefit from a high rapid boil or a high sear. Just a gentle sizzle is enough for you to be able to control it and know where it's at in the cooking process. So yeah, relying on my hearing and my smell is really important during the cooking process. Taste, of course, as I'm trying to season it and make sure everything is in balance. That comes in a little bit later, but I would say it's mostly smelling and hearing that I'm counting on.
Yeah, so the Matt Murdock effect, like with Matt Murdock, when he got his powers, he was blinded by a vat of chemicals, and all of his senses were heightened to superhuman levels. So obviously that's unrealistic. So, but there is this myth that if you do lose your sight, your other senses are heightened a little bit, and for you, it's not that you are heightened in the other senses; you're just more in tune to them,
Correct.
in terms of touch and hearing and taste and smell. Those weren't heightened. You're just more just in tune and can focus in on those a little bit more because you don't have the sight that's taking up, like you said, 70% of your brain power. So you watched the whole season of Daredevil Born Again.
I did.
And I thank you for that, just for doing it from a podcast. I appreciate that. And the Daredevil series on Netflix, the first 4 seasons in its original format on Netflix, got a lot of praise for how Matt Murdock was portraying those with visual impairment
Mm,
and those that were blind. You watched just Daredevil Born Again, the revival of the series on Disney Plus. Based on your experience with the show, how do you think he portrayed someone that is blind on the show? Superpowers aside, just in
it's
general.
hard to ignore those. They were so
I know, right?
powerful. Um, yeah, he spoke as a blind person would. It's good to see you again. He didn't mince around with that because we don't. That's the way we speak in our culture. There was so much superpower there. So many people he was fighting. So many times he was out the window, you know, because he heard people coming. I but I'd like to go into how other blind people are portrayed. I'm going to go back now and watch those first seasons. I didn't realize that. I would like to hear, especially if they are audio described, which I'm guessing they were. Um, but there have been other ones, like there was one called, oh, now I'm forgetting it, but she was a blind woman. So it's interesting with Hollywood. And this is controversial that you'll talk with different actors and stuff. Like I was listening to Sean Penn being interviewed, and he played the guy from San Francisco that was
Ooh,
murdered. He was a
I'm
gay
not for sure.
politician, a gay man, and this was like in the 80s, and he was murdered. And so uh, they talked about a lot in the interviews, and I heard it in other ones too, where if you're not gay, then you shouldn't play a gay person on TV. And
Oh,
it's
okay, yeah,
like,
yeah,
you've heard that, and it's like, but that's acting. If I'm not gay, and
right.
I can play a gay, so it's a little controversial. But the American Council of the Blind and National Federation of the Blind, when there are blind people that are portrayed in movies, they really want a blind person in there. So it's an interesting. I don't. I'd like to see blind people get work. I like to see blind actors do what they want to do, and they've had some wonderful ones. But it's an interesting controversy as to if a sighted person is a better actor than the blind person, then maybe I would say though, but if it's just easier to not have to produce the script in braille, then I'd have a harder time with it, or like when I'm in the blind kitchen, that's a studio kitchen, and we have bump dots underneath the counter. I know where position 1 is. I know where camera 3 is. I know where camera 2 is, and so they adapt the kitchen for me. I have bump dots on the stove because it's a gas stove. I have a glass top one at home, which they're very different, but that still principle still applies. But we definitely adapt the kitchen so that I can use my own kitchen.
So let's say that the showrunners do Daredevil Born Again season 2, and they
Hmm.
happen to catch this podcast out of the blue,
Hmm.
and they call you up. What advice would you give them on depicting a blind character in the kitchen if they wanted to do
Ooh.
season 2? Like, what advice would you give them there?
That is a good question. First of all, I'd have them do, because you would think a lot of blind people would watch that. So you would think the audio description would be wonderful, but you're the one that told me more about what was happening in the scenes.
Clean up
So
the audio description. That'd be
yeah,
number one.
yeah, be more detailed in that because there was time. There was times when nothing was being said and he was doing something as you told me. But or like I do in the blind kitchen is I talk about what I'm doing. I say, okay, now I'm touching the top of the pan. Oh, ooh, I'm smelling it. Ooh, it smells really good. Oops, let me taste it. So tasting spoon, it is a spoon that has an 8-inch handle, stainless steel, and then it's got, so when I set it into the pot, the bowl, the cavity of the spoon is flat, even though the handle is angled. So I can I don't have to get anywhere close
Mm.
to the liquid to be able to taste it, and it holds a little more than a teaspoon, so it's a nice size, and then you have 12 of them at at your disposal there while you're cooking. So I would probably have him use adaptive tools and say, this is what this, I've got this long handled spoon so that I don't have to touch a liquid. I think people would be interested if they're interested in watching how blind people maneuver in the world. Then I think that would be a welcomed addition to the show.
Yeah,
And
so some more adaptive tools that could pique the interest of those watching and go, "Oh, what's that?" Because he didn't use any adaptive tools in the kitchen in this scene. It was just touch and feel, and everything was in the right place. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not what the show is about. So
sure,
they didn't
sure,
really think about a lot of that. But
of course.
for those of us that were watching, I was like, "Oh, that's kind of a unique scene. I kind of want to know more."
Yeah, of
Because
course.
if we do a season two, it'd be good. But for the first part, cleaning up that audio description would be great for those, because you're like, I don't know what's going on. I remember you emailed me. He's like, I don't know what's going on in this scene. What are we going to be talking about? And then I described it to you, and you're like, oh, okay, well that makes sense.
Right, right.
So good. So for listeners that may have vision loss or know someone who does, what's one small thing they can do today to make cooking safer? They haven't seen uh, the blind kitchen. They don't know anything about it, but what's one thing they can do right now to make things a little bit safer for them?
So, first of all, talking to the person. A lot of people, it's the elephant in the room. They just assume you don't want to talk about it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you say, I really would rather not talk about it. Oh, but if you can get a conversation going with them and they are willing to say, how can I help you what can I do to allow you to be in the kitchen again? What would you want to do? Would you want to make breakfast? Would you want to cook a turkey? Would you want to uh, cut up vegetables for a salad? And then if they say this is what I would like to be able to do, then go on. And it doesn't have to be the blind kitchen. There are other places that you can find it, but mine's the most organized, just saying. There are avocado tools that you can't cut your hands with, but they do three things. They can break the skin of an avocado. So do you know the number one ER injury related to cooking is people that cut themselves when they're cutting an avocado? Because
Mm.
once you get through that hard skin, then it's like cutting through jello. It's just gonna go, it goes through. Meryl Streep had major surgery on her hand because she cut it with an avocado. So
Oh
the
wow.
tool I have is shaped kind of like a shoehorn, an old-fashioned stainless steel, and it's got jagged little teeth on the side, like a serrated edge. And it's not sharp enough to cut your hand, but it's sharp enough to cut through the skin. And then you just go around, and then on the very tip of the triangle, it's got more bigger jagged teeth that you can get underneath the stone without trying to whack it with your knife, to get the knife to stick in the stone. It doesn't have to be that fancy. You can just, divot it out. And then the third side is slightly angled, like sloped, and it goes perfectly underneath between the skin and the meat of the avocado to be able to clean it in one doing. So if they tell you they would like to be able to use these, they'd like to cut this kind of food, there are knives with guides on them that are adjustable. So I can cut every piece of that brisket is going to be the exact same width because that guide is holding me true. I'm just pushing down with the knife. I'm cutting like I would normally be cut, but I'm making sure that guide stays in contact with the right hand side of that meat or the right hand side of that potato or the right hand side of that bread. and I can adjust it to where I want it and then just keep cutting. So and then you've got the cut glove on the other end. If they're a little nervous about it, wear the cut glove. No, that's not breaking any rules, and it's perfectly legal. And
Yeah.
so I would just say, eh, approach them about it, ask them if they're okay to talk about it. And we're not doing psychology here. We're just saying, hey, I know you used to love to cook. Is there something you would like to cook? I, I I understand there are some tools that blind and techniques. So that's the other thing in the blind kitchen. Sometimes it's just a technique, and I'll explain one of them to you. So the first thing I do when I go to cook is I run a couple of inches of soapy water in the sink. And and it's hot. And the reason I do that is because let's say I am uh, cracking eggs and, the eggshells, sometimes you get it on you, or I'm seasoning a protein, and now this can grow bacteria exponentially, at room temperature. So I want to get over to my sink to wash my fingers, but I've got to touch the counter. Now I've got to touch the faucet. Now I have to touch the water control. Now I've got to grab the soap. And now I'm ready to put my hands under the water and wash it. But now I've got to go back and uncontaminate all of those areas. If I have that soapy water, all I have to do, I can use the back of my hands or I can use my forearms, find my way to the sink and plunge it. And it's every cook should do that. And the other thing, so you've started your cleanup too. Now I can pull my hands out. Now I can touch the water faucet to rinse the soap off. And you only do a couple inches because cooking takes time. And if the water gets cold and greasy, it's quite unpleasant. So you can add just a couple inches. It revives the suds. It's comfortable to the touch again, and you've already started your cleanup. So those are some of the other tips and techniques that you get that don't cost any money. It's just a strategy.
That's a good tip just in general. I'm gonna have to
It
start.
is.
I never even thought about. I mean, because I'm the same way. I'm cooking with chicken, and I'm like, oh God, I got to touch everything now just to wash my hands. I'm gonna start doing that. That is
It's
really
fabulous.
smart. I
And
never
you
even
start
thought about
cleanup.
that.
Use a
Yeah,
measuring cup. You use the spoon. Start it. Put it in there to soak.
it's amazing, amazing. Just didn't even think about that. So for those of us that can see and maybe have family members at home that are blind and are trying to be independent in the kitchen, what are some good and bad ways that for those of us that see would be a good and bad way to help? Like we're quick to help out of good intentions, but
Of
maybe
course.
we're hindering in a way that we don't know or understand.
So there's a joke in the blind community around cooking, and it'll be, they invited me in to help with the holiday dinner into the kitchen, and they asked me if I wanted to toss the salad. Not cut stuff up for the salad, not make the dressing for the salad, toss it. That was all I was qualified for. So so the thing is to find out what they would want to do. Maybe they don't even like to cook, but especially if you knew that it was their passion for a long period of their lives, um, I would have a conversation with them, and then you do your research because once you lose your vision, it took me years to learn how to use a computer. I use it without a monitor, although I have a laptop now, so I have my camera, but I use it without a monitor and without a mouse. It's all keyboard commands like, Control C is copy, Control V is paste.
Mm.
I can do my whole computer just with keyboard, and the computer talks to me. I have a screen reader, and my phone does the same thing except without a keyboard. I'm using swipes and gestures. So a lot of people that have vision loss later in life are not going to go to a training school. They're relaxing. They're supposed to be enjoying the grandkids. They're supposed to be making cookies and stuff like that. Um, and so they don't know this stuff exists. So you could have a conversation with them, or you could remember something you used to like, that your grandma used to make the best omelets ever for breakfast when you'd come to visit, and you could do your research and say, how do blind people make omelets? And there are, and for that, it's just a piece of parchment paper. That's all it is. And
Oh wow.
it's a French omelet. So you have all your ingredients chopped and cooked, because they're not going to cook in the pan. It's only going to cook for a few minutes. And then you do your eggs and your heavy cream, however you're going to do it. And you put butter in the pan, and you put a round sheet of parchment paper. And then I deposit the egg mixture into the pan, and I've left a little corner of the parchment paper exposed. So now I can lift that up and I can roll it like a creamy French omelet. And I could charge you $5 more, but because it's not folded in half like a moon, like a Denny's. But it's an elegant presentation. You put it seam side down. You can put your ingredients in it. Once it doesn't, so there's a difference between wet with eggs and tacky. Tacky's fine to eat. Wet means it's not cooked yet. So you want to make sure, but you want to add your ingredients to it. And once it gets to that point where it's tacky, because you don't want it to brown, you want it to be nice and creamy and delicate. And then you just roll it up and you can easily guide that out of the pan onto a plate. Fresh herbs, good stuff.
Yeah. So the main thing is just to communicate, right, with your family members. Like,
Yes.
what are you
Yes.
comfortable doing? How can I help you? Like, just don't assume that they need help. Just say, hey, how can I help you? Where do you feel comfortable in doing that? So communication is the key, I think.
It is absolutely. And where are their challenges? That's where your research would come in. They don't
Right.
know how to do it. So why aren't you like making salad or you like making meatloaf? Why don't you make it? What is it? Well, I don't know how to measure things anymore. Well, there's a talking scale that can measure out different kinds of meats. If you make your meatloaf with, like a certain proportion of ground steak or ground beef, ground pork, ground veal, you can use a talking scale to achieve the proportions that you want. And there are portion scoops. That's what they use in culinary restaurants for costing and to make sure each customer gets the same presentation and the same amount. Why wouldn't we use those at home? It's the same thing. So we can make attractive dishes, but if you don't know how, that's where you run into trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Chef Deborah, this has been an amazing conversation. I thank you so much. I want to give you the last few minutes here just to promote anything you got going on. What are some projects that the Blind Kitchen is doing? Where can people follow you on Instagram or on social networks to keep up with the Blind Kitchen, to keep up with what you're doing, and to learn more about the Blind Kitchen? Maybe they're listening to this and thinking, oh, some of these tools and tricks sound pretty cool. Where can I learn more? Where do you want people to go?
Yeah, so theblindkitchen.com, and make sure you include the word the, because there's a show in Boston called Blind Kitchen where they have people that see perfectly well and they blindfold them. And they're local celebrity chefs. I got mixed reviews on that, but it's kind of funny. But you have to put in the Blind Kitchen. And that'll give you, it's very organized, it's very screen reader friendly. There's no pop-up ads. I don't do, it keeps it clean so that blind people can navigate it easily with their screen readers or their magnifiers. We're on Facebook at The Blind Kitchen. We're on Instagram at The Blind Kitchen 1, the number 1. We're also on Instagram and LinkedIn. So yeah, so if you come to, and we have a YouTube channel. So we have over 100 videos now. We're making more. We're starting to do more shorts, which I like better. They're a lot more fun. But when you go on, they'll have there's like 12 different categories in the Blind Kitchen library on cleaning, organizing, labeling, measuring, dining out, uh, uh, entertaining guests in your home. There's just all different kinds of things that people would say, how do blind people do that? And the thing is, a lot of people don't identify as blind or vision impaired, just like they don't. If your grandfather is hard of hearing, you don't call him deaf. You say grandpa's a little hard of hearing now. And it's the same thing with vision loss. There's a lot of people that don't identify as visually impaired or blind, but if they can't see as well as they used to in the dark, maybe they're not getting out there and grilling and doing that stuff. But there are tools that could help them, even if they don't identify as having vision loss.
Amazing, amazing. So I got links. I'll have links in the show notes. So if
Thank
you want to
you.
click down there, and I'll lead you to the Blind Kitchen, not Blind Kitchen, but theblindkitchen.com
There you go.
to learn more and to see the YouTube videos. And if you're just interested in learning how all of this works, I would recommend going there. So, Chef Deborah, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It's been enlightening. It was educational for me. I learned some things. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on your show and being open-minded. I love your podcast. I learned so much from your guests who
Oh,
are professional chefs and professional restaurants and stuff like that. And I always get inspired. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate you being open-minded.